The sky was gray. At 9 a.m. in Washington, D.C., a light mist settled over the government building. On the wide marble steps of the Supreme Court, reporters, law students, and quiet onlookers waited patiently. Today's case was considered historic, not for the content of the trial, but for the person about to speak inside. Brad Pitt. Yes, that Brad Pitt, Oscar-winning actor, now taking on a role unlike anything he had ever played, stepping into the Supreme Court to defend a petitioner's constitutional rights. The courtroom went still as he walked toward the podium. In a perfectly tailored dark gray suit, there was no hesitation in his steps, no exaggeration in his gaze, only calm determination. Just as he opened his mouth to begin, a voice cut through the silence. "Mr. Pitt, for someone with your background, engaging in constitutional interpretation at this level is, to put it mildly, unexpected. This court is not a theater." Breaths were held. No one moved. Brad gave a brief smile, took a small step back, opened his folder, and looked directly at the bench. "Your Honor, winning an Oscar doesn't qualify me for this moment, but memorizing the Constitution, studying its history, and recognizing the moments when justice stayed silent, that's why I'm here. This isn't about performance, it's about truth." In that moment, something changed in the room. They no longer saw just an actor. They saw a man who had done the work. And whatever was about to unfold, one thing was certain. Brad Pitt hadn't come to play a role. He had come to speak for what was right. The courtroom felt tense, like the air had thickened. Brad Pitt slowly placed his notes down on the table. Chief Justice Roberts' words still hung in the air. Everyone was waiting for a reaction, but Brad didn't rush. He looked straight at Roberts and spoke with calm conviction. "I'm not standing here as an actor, Your Honor. I'm here as a defender of constitutional rights. If my background is a problem, then you're not just questioning education, you're questioning dedication." A soft murmur moved through the room. A couple of law students began scribbling in their notebooks, impressed. Roberts kept his expression unreadable. "This court relies on constitutional principles, not emotional arguments. If you have something relevant to say on that basis, proceed." Brad stepped forward, opened his file, and pulled out an aged document, a legal decision from 1789. His voice filled the room. "The Henderson v. DOJ case isn't just about property. It's about the violation of the Fifth Amendment, that no person shall be deprived of property without due process. And that principle goes all the way back to the 18th century. Justice Sotomayor looked up, studying Brad closely. Justice Gorsuch tapped his fingers lightly against the bench. Something in the courtroom had shifted. Brad held up the ruling and read from it. His voice never wavered. "In 1794, in Carleton v. Maryland, this very court stated clearly, 'The seizure of property from individuals not convicted of a crime damages the public's trust in the state.'" For the first time, Roberts glanced at the paper in Brad's hand. Then he closed his eyes and let out a deep breath. Something had changed. "You may proceed, Mr. Pitt." A silence followed. A young law student sitting near Brad smiled. There was a flicker of hope. This wasn't just a hearing anymore. This was a fight against prejudice, and the sound of justice trying to be heard. The courtroom was still. Brad Pitt's calm, steady stance felt like a quiet answer to Chief Justice Roberts' challenge. And at that moment, everyone in the room was thinking the same thing. What was an actor really doing at that podium? "I didn't come here just as an actor. I came here as a citizen. Memorizing the Constitution is easy, but understanding it, carrying it in your heart, that's when the real practice of law begins." In the back of the room, a young law student looked up. He had stopped taking notes. Brad's words filled the space not just with legal arguments, but with conviction. This case isn't just about property. It's about the dignity of the individual versus the power of the state. It's about recognizing justice not just in books, but in life itself. Roberts lowered his glasses and paused. He flipped through the file in front of him and spoke with measured authority. "Mr. Pitt, your originalist reading refers to the 1790 schooner exchange case. But that ruling dealt with maritime law. How do you believe it applies to modern civil forfeiture?" Brad didn't hesitate. He bowed his head for a moment, then opened his file again. His hands didn't shake. The schooner exchange case wasn't just about a ship. It was about how the court defined its jurisdiction. If, back then, the government needed international immunity to touch property, then why today can the home of an innocent citizen be seized without any link to a crime? silence settled once more. One of the female justices leaned over and whispered to her colleague. Brad's response wasn't just academic, it was thoughtful. And more than that, it was real. Roberts closed his folder and looked directly at him. "Go on, Mr. Pitt. We're listening." And in that moment, the mood in the courtroom shifted. This wasn't just a celebrity moment anymore. It had become a real constitutional debate. The courtroom went quiet for a moment. Brad Pitt placed his hands on the podium and looked directly at the justices. It was finally his turn to speak. Honorable justices, today we're not just discussing a statute. We're facing the core of our Constitution, the dignity of our people, and the true meaning of justice. Chief Justice Roberts leaned forward. Court clerks held their pens, ready to write. Brad continued. The current civil forfeiture laws, which allow the government to seize property from people without proof of a crime, are now in direct conflict with the Fifth Amendment. And I'm not here with just a theory. I came with a real story. He pulled a folded document from his pocket and presented it to the court. This is the official record of a home in Philadelphia. Ms. Ramirez, an elderly woman living with her grandson, lost her house because of a crime that happened nearby, one she had nothing to do with. This case is hers. This is about justice. Justice Kagan nodded as she took notes. Justice Thomas peered over his glasses, focused. I finished law school by taking night classes. I studied Supreme Court rulings between scenes while memorizing scripts on set, because I realized being a voice for people doesn't always need cameras. Sometimes it takes a courtroom, and today, the only camera I need is this official record. A quiet stir moved through the audience. For the first time, some in the legal world were truly listening. But Brad had one goal: the truth. Civil forfeiture laws were originally meant for international smuggling and maritime cases. But now, they're used to take homes, cars, even bank accounts from innocent people in their own neighborhoods. Our Constitution forbids punishment without accusation or a fair trial. We must fix this. Justice Sotomayor raised her eyebrows. Brad stepped back slightly and gave his final words. This country has given me so much: fame, opportunity, the spotlight. But none of that gives us the right to take a woman's home, a child's bedroom, a life, for nothing in return. Today I speak not just for Ms. Ramirez, but for the thousands who've suffered in silence under this system. Roberts paused. He turned to his notes. But this time, his gaze on Brad Pitt held something different: curiosity. Because now, everyone was thinking the same thing. This wasn't just Brad Pitt. This was the voice of constitutional justice. As Brad stepped away from the podium, the courtroom fell silent. Then Deputy Attorney General Maxwell stood up. His expression was confident, almost mocking. Honorable justices, coming from a Hollywood stage to this one takes courage, but the Constitution requires more than courage. He turned and looked directly at Brad. The emotional stories Mr. Pitt shared might impress the media, but here we speak through the law. The current statutes give the federal government authority to fight organized crime. If you narrow that power, as he suggests, drug cartels will be the first to celebrate. Chief Justice Roberts gave Maxwell a small nod to continue. Brad leaned back in his seat, eyes locked on Maxwell. Quoting history and telling dramatic tales may move the room, but the law isn't built on emotion. It's built on limits, and Mr. Pitt's boundaryless interpretation risks upsetting our constitutional balance. The courtroom grew tense. Some legal scholars nodded in agreement, others stopped taking notes. Justice Sotomayor placed her pen down. Mr. Maxwell, in the document about Ms. Ramirez's house, there's no mention of her committing any crime. How do you justify the seizure? Maxwell hesitated for a moment. Your Honor, the law considers the location and the area where the incident occurred. Justice Sotomayor interrupted. So you're saying location matters more than guilt? That's a dangerous argument. Brad allowed himself a quiet breath. Justice Kavanaugh then leaned forward. Mr. Pitt, you defended both the Due Process Clause and the Takings Clause of the Fifth Amendment. Why should we consider them together? Brad stood once more, eyes returning to the justices. Because property rights aren't just about owning something. They're about being protected in how it's taken. If an innocent person can lose their home and has no chance to defend themselves, then what's taken isn't just property, it's justice. Justice Kavanaugh nodded. Brad stepped back again. At that moment, the mood in the courtroom had shifted. The justices, once skeptical of a celebrity in their chamber, were now engaged, asking questions, taking notes, paying close attention. Chief Justice Roberts removed his glasses and looked at Brad. For the first time, his gaze was more curious than critical. Mr. Pitt, Who helped you write this? Because this level of detail is uncommon. No one. I've been writing this for 3 years, quietly in the silence of night. Because not everyone has a voice, but everyone deserves a right. Silence returned to the room, but this time, it was out of respect. Outside, reporters stood under the morning sky, and though they didn't know the outcome yet, they could feel it. This case might change more than just a verdict. It might change the system itself. When the court broke for a short recess, the justices stepped into their private chamber. Tension still lingered in the air. Brad remained seated in the back row of the courtroom, holding his files, alone. Outside, reporters sensed something had shifted. Inside the conference room, folders opened and quiet discussion began. Justice Barrett, thoughtful. We need to focus on substance, not presentation. Pitt's argument calls directly on constitutional principles. The link between the takings clause and due process is compelling. Justice Thomas nodded. And historically grounded. Who else would bring up Gage v. United States from 1790? He spoke like someone presenting a third-year thesis. Justice Kagan. So, we agree. This wasn't a performance. It was research. It was reflection. It was real constitutional interpretation. Chief Justice Roberts clasped his hands together. Maybe it was my own bias speaking earlier, but here's the truth. If we shut the door on those who come by untraditional paths, then the Constitution becomes just ink on a wall. What he did, sometimes even we don't take that much care. While the justices debated inside, Brad still sat alone in silence. His shoulders were heavy, but his eyes were focused. A woman quietly approached, one of the journalists. She whispered, "We didn't expect to see you here, but inside they're all talking about you. Did you really prepare this argument on your own?" Brad smiled, tired but proud. "With just my pen and the quiet. Not everyone has a voice, but the Constitution belongs to everyone." At that moment, the courtroom doors opened again. The justices returned to their seats. The room fell silent. Chief Justice Roberts spoke clearly and firmly. This court has carefully reviewed the arguments presented today. An unexpected yet deeply reasoned and historically anchored perspective has forced us to think again. Brad held his breath. Roberts continued, "It will take time to issue our ruling, but I can already say, what we heard today reminded us that the Constitution is not static. It's alive." A soft murmur moved through the gallery. Brad's eyes welled with tears, just briefly. The session was adjourned, but everyone knew. This wasn't just a case. It was a turning point. As the justices returned to their chambers, Chief Justice Roberts paused. He turned to his clerk. Someone should look into how this man prepared, because today, he made history in the Supreme Court. Outside the courthouse, something felt different. Normally, reporters asked a few quick questions and left, but today was not normal. As Brad Pitt stepped down the marble stairs, he was met with cameras, microphones, and dozens of eyes. Everyone had the same question in mind. Was this a movie scene or a moment that would go down in history? One reporter shouted out, "Mr. Pitt, even Chief Justice Roberts praised your argument. Did you really prepare it all on your own?" Brad replied calmly, his voice steady. "I've played many roles in front of cameras, but this wasn't a role. It was a responsibility. I had to speak for those who can't." At that moment, social media exploded. #PittTVDOJ was trending worldwide. Law schools began holding panels to break down his speech. One Harvard law professor appeared live on national TV. Brad Pitt didn't just speak in a courtroom. He sparked a shift in constitutional thought. His argument revived core rights that had been ignored for years. But the most powerful moment came the next day. Chief Justice John Roberts did something rare. He wrote a short piece for the Washington Post. The title had only 3 words: "I was wrong." Inside he wrote, "I spoke from bias, but Pitt's argument, rich in history, rooted in constitutional integrity, and grounded in human dignity, was exemplary. From the bench, it's not always easy to see what's right, but this time, I saw it. And I'm grateful." That evening, Brad sat alone in a quiet diner. He sipped his coffee. At the next table, 2 law students whispered his name. Brad smiled. The waiter placed a coffee on his table and left a folded napkin. On it, a handwritten note. "My brother lost everything 3 years ago, for no reason. Thank you for today." Brad folded the napkin and tucked it into his pocket. Then, to himself in a soft voice, "Maybe this wasn't just a case, maybe this time I lived the right movie." And that night, he didn't sleep as a Hollywood star. He slept as a defender of the Constitution. The Supreme Court chamber was full again. Silence filled the room. It had for hours. All eyes were on the chief bench. Chief Justice John Roberts held the ruling in his hands and began to speak. Today, we are not just interpreting a section of the Constitution. Today, we are listening to its spirit. And this case reminds us, justice is not only in the laws we write, but in how we choose to enforce them. Some held their breath. Brad stared at Roberts without blinking. The court rules 7-2 in favor of the petitioner. The federal government's authority to seize private property under civil forfeiture will now be redefined within the bounds of the Fifth Amendment. This sets a new framework under both the due process and takings clauses. A wave of murmurs filled the room. This wasn't just about one man's case. It opened a new chapter for thousands who had suffered in silence. Roberts lifted his eyes from the document and looked straight at Brad Pitt. "Mr. Pitt, I was the one who didn't take you seriously. But today, I witnessed your resolve, your courage, and your legal insight. You didn't just win a case. You broke down a prejudice." Brad stood up. The hearing was over, but many in the courtroom remained frozen in their seats. A woman whispered through her tears, "That's why my son still has a home, because they couldn't take it from him." As Brad walked out, the crowd silently moved aside. There was no applause, just quiet respect. A silent kind of honor. Outside, the sky had started to clear. The rain had stopped. The gray clouds were finally pulling away. A young student ran up to him, out of breath, holding a stack of law books. "Mr. Pitt, I'm a black law student. I came here today for you, and for the first time, I saw myself in this profession. Thank you." Brad placed a hand on the student's shoulder. "Don't just see it. Live it." He kept walking, slow, steady, certain. That day in court, it wasn't an actor who spoke. It was a voice. And that voice was justice. 1 week later, Brad Pitt stood on a stage in a simple suit. Behind him, the seal of Harvard Law School shone brightly. The room was packed, students, professors, reporters, and people from across the country who cared about justice reform. Brad, calm but firm. "When I started acting, I thought the most important role of my life would be a movie character. But now I know. The most powerful line I've ever delivered was in a courtroom." The crowd was silent, listening. Brad. This case wasn't personal, but justice is always personal. Because injustice begins in the quietest neighborhoods. And if we can't reach them, we can't reach anyone. Applause started, but Brad gently raised his hand. "Brad, I didn't win this alone. This decision belongs to the young woman who lost her mother's house, to the farmer barely getting by, to the mother whose voice was silenced in her own community." He looked down at a woman in the front row, tears in her eyes. Years ago, she lost her home. Now, because of this case, she had it back. After stepping off the stage, Brad entered a small room. Waiting for him was Chief Justice John Roberts. Roberts held out his hand. Roberts, softly. "Mr. Pitt, watching you reminded me what it truly means to be a judge. I couldn't rise above my own bias, but you rose far above me." Brad shook his hand, then nodded. "Brad, that's all right, sir. Sometimes even the highest courts need to hear a case twice." That evening, Brad left the building quietly. The sky was clear. As he walked, he pulled a folded paper from his pocket. It read, "The Pitt Foundation Support Program for Justice Access and Legal Education. Each year, it will offer 100 scholarships to students from low-income communities to study law. Each scholarship comes with one line: Don't be afraid to speak, because justice walks in the voice of those who do." Brad looked up. Across the street, a group of kids were laughing and walking home. One of them caught his eye. The light in their eyes shone a little brighter. Maybe one day, one of those kids would rise and speak for justice. And maybe this story was only the first step in their journey.